there were discussion groups, and it had a very vast hierarchy, all kinds of topics which were mostly technical. That's where it began. But people had started putting in politics and social things in there. So there was something India, where people from India would discuss things. So about 1988, 89, maybe even 87, but 88, 89 I think, that became very active. That was the first time Sikhs and non-Sikhs were now directly discussing what was going on in Punjab. And what was really interesting was how clueless certain people were, but on the other hand, how empathetic also so many non-Sikhs were to what happened in Punjab. So that was eye-opening in both ways, that how some people had such wrong views. And by the way, on the Sikh side as well, so a lot of people, of course, had very wrong views and misinformed and so forth. But you could see how, these are educated people. These were mostly engineers, if not entirely engineers. Students, engineers, universities, that's all it was. And yet even amongst them, there was such a lack of information. But then there were so many people who were so empathetic, that really wanted to know. And the bottom line is, my point about free speech ultimately leads people to discuss and work it out. And what these totalitarian countries do, and frankly, India under Indira Gandhi was a totalitarian nation. Press could be shut down anytime they felt like it. They could suspend your basic liberties any moment they felt like it. One judge had to order an issue and you couldn't hold a protest or anything. What did that do? It only created worse and worse conditions, led to a disaster in Punjab and other places as well. I'm quite sure India of today is nothing like that. A lot more improved. What happened in 1984 in Punjab, even 10 years later, could not happen.
It was under those very specific political conditions, right?
Yes. I mean, there's so much to be improved in India, no question about it. But 1980s were a unique time.
Absolutely.
You know, it was still a world divided by the Iron Curtain, and that meant a great deal. Indira Gandhi's association with the Soviet Union meant a great deal. What was going on in Afghanistan meant a great deal. All these things had an effect. That only 10 years later was not the case. In the 1990s, India just went down the path of modernization and opening up and joining the world community more and more. And I think by virtue of that, things changed a great deal. But 1980s were a very different time.
Absolutely. So in terms of the ways that Sikhs were organizing themselves, touching on that a little bit, how did you see that evolving from the initial reaction to even today? How did that, because at some point it must have tapered down. So how did you see that fading away? Because there must have been kind of a climax building up in terms of how much people were organizing, and then at some point maybe it wasn't so much of an active movement anymore.
So all through the 80s, early 90s, it was all driven by what's happening in Punjab. It had nothing to do with anything going on here. And for a lot of the people, the whole purpose, the whole reason for any political activism was to bring relief to Punjab. Now, but ultimately, Punjab is going to go the way the Punjabis are going to take it. Right? And if they're going to misbehave, or they're not going to pull together, or they're going to have infighting and what have you, the people overseas can't really help. They're in support of what goes on in Punjab. So clearly the political situation in Punjab got better for a while, because in the late 80s, in 1989, political climate in New Delhi was changing. Rajiv Gandhi was gone. The Nehru-Gandhi family was not in power any longer. I think it was VP Singh who became prime minister. Then there was Narasimha Rao that came after him. These were people of different ideology, and they were much more, I think, forward-thinking people. And the elections finally took place in Punjab, and the very pro-Sikh faction just about won it all. It was amazing, like landslide type of election, things like that. So things were looking better for a while. But then all the violence, it's a long story as to what caused it. What I would have my opinion, others might have others.
The long period of disappearances and whatnot.
Disappearances and a lot of infighting and assassinations and things, and I mean it got really ugly. It then just went downhill from there, and then there was, a few years later, it had just totally disappeared. And then Punjab went on down its own path, and I think, so that was another turning point. People after that, but people had learned that they needed political existence, political power, and a way to stand up and defend themselves politically when time comes. So I think that then moved over into more local issues. So the Sikhs today, I mean, all that type of political activism, and we have people from whether they're Sikh or not. We have a non-Sikh governor, right, who's a Punjabi
from a Sikh background.
in Louisiana, and we have a Sikh governor who's who's also from Punjab. Well, maybe she's not born in Punjab, in South Carolina.
Sikh background, yeah.
Right. I mean, these are great things, right? So who knows what effect behind that is what the awareness that came in the 1980s, that started in the 1980s. But Sikhs and others also in this area now are much more attuned for their own reasons.
Absolutely.
Right.
So what about the perception of Sikhs by white America, by the great majority of people? Did you see that shift from the 80s until now? Was there ever a time when Sikhs were, perceived the way that, for example, Muslims are today?
Right. The propaganda against the Sikhs was severe. That was the Sikhs' problem, was that they had no, they have no nation. A nation goes a long way towards safeguarding your interests as a people. Sikhs had no such thing. And they felt that they were misunderstood, and they had no official organ through which they could represent their view. And that's why it was all happening in a grassroots fashion. On the other hand, you had the Indian government who understood very early on that the best way to squelch the Sikh movement of any kind is to highlight the terrorism side of it, which of course was real, was happening, but there were all kinds of questions as to who's behind that. Be as it may, even if someone sitting in the United States made any issue known which was really human rights in nature, it would be branded as terrorist sympathizers, and the word terrorism was thrown about left and right. It took a while, but I think the Sikhs in this country got over that, or dispelled that quite well. It took a while, but what it required was involvement not only through the political means, but also through the human rights organizations, Amnesty International, and other Human Rights Watch, and other places like that. And then slowly people understand these things, and it got better. How are the Sikhs perceived today? I think it's much more of a considered environment where people do think more and deeply, and they try to find out, who these people are and what's their beef, right? So I think it's a lot better now. But at that time, that was the biggest thing.
Absolutely.
It was just being tarred with this ugly label,
Absolutely.
and then left to defend yourself.
Yeah. So, in terms of how this history is kind of transmitted through generations, so coming to today, so one of the questions that, the questionnaire has is, have you talked about this with your family? So have you and have others around you spoken to, your children about this, or have you seen how this is going through generations now? Or do you think it's kind of going to not be so much of an issue with future generations?
It's, have we talked about it? Yes, you do. like I said, there was a time in history that even in India those conditions did not exist 10, 15, 20 years later. On the other hand, there are learnings on both sides. There are learnings also that even after the Indian government did what it did, how did the Sikhs behave? Right? What did they do in Punjab? Punjab is not in good shape today. Everything, I don't have that much connection with Punjab, but everything I hear, everyone is very disappointed in Punjab as to what has happened to their state. It is a corrupt place. It is run very poorly. It's the chief minister is Sikh. No matter which party, Sikhs are the ones running Punjab, but they are corrupt people, and that system is corrupt. And so I generally feel when I talk to younger people today, or even my friends and circle of friends, they'd rather not have anything to do with what goes on in Punjab, frankly, because it's so mired in the complexities and corruption of that system. And these things are system-oriented things. These are systematic problems in a culture and a society. They'd rather not. They're much more concerned about their life here, and what does it mean to have a good life and still hold on to your traditions and your culture? How do you hold on to the Sikh culture, Punjabi culture? Right? How do you hold on to it while you're living in America, while you appreciate America and you love the life that you have here, while still holding on to something that makes you a Sikh?
Absolutely. So
that is a challenge for all the young people today.
yeah.
Right?
So to what extent do you think that 84 is going to be a part of our Sikh heritage that's passed down to us? So a lot of these historical moments kind of have become a part of the cultural memory to a point where, kids are told these stories when they're little. It becomes
Right.
an aspect of
Right.
Sikh identity.
Right.
So do you think this is really more rooted in Punjab, or do you think there is some kind of imprint on Sikh memory and Sikh collective memory that it's going to have?
It's definitely going to be a historical event that is going to live on through generations. It is not, of course it occurred in Punjab, but it's not something that's limited to Punjab. The problems of Punjab, yes, those are problems of Punjab, and someone living in UK, someone living in America, they'll see their life differently. But what happened in Punjab in 1984 was a rebellion by a people who felt that they were denied more and more their identity, which they felt was something special. And they felt that there was political treachery that was committed against them. And they had good basis for it. This gets very complex. On the other hand, why did the Indian governing powers felt that the Sikhs were these problematic, trouble-making people that had to be dealt with? What basis did they have? Were they justified? Okay, in their mind at least, obviously they were justified. But the crux of it is for a people to have an identity and for them to look for a way to govern themselves and have certain freedoms and not being given those and being denied those. That is a central issue that'll always be there. Always has been, right from the start, from the inception of Sikhism. That's what they were always hunted for, is because they were the ones who stood up. They were the ones who were individualistic. They were the ones who said, to use an American phrase, to give me liberty or give me death. That's what Sikhs were. So it's part of the Sikh persona. So since long as that is what Sikh defines to a good extent what a Sikh is, what happened in 1980s is a very central part of Sikh history.
Absolutely.
So it'll live on.
Absolutely. Any closing thoughts? Anything you'd like to end on? Anything that was left out?
Well, it's a very, very traumatic time. You think of it even today, it's traumatic. What feels really bad is the number of people that died. Lots of people died. Lots of people were tortured. A lot of people were thrown in jails forever. The Sikhs also committed a lot of acts of violence. Clearly, it was a very violent time. I'm not saying it's one-sided, but on one side you had a helter-skelter group of people with very little command and control, and if they committed atrocities, that's one thing, but on the other hand, you have a supposed democratic constitutional democracy, and that government does something to its own people, what they did in Punjab. I think most of India has not come to grips with that, what that means. And you asked about what it means to the history of the Sikhs. What does it mean to the history of India? But what does it mean? Have they learned that this can happen in India, and if it happened once, it can happen again? Have they learned that? I don't think so. I think the Sikhs haven't. There are certain things that are so traumatic that people just like a human being does, they hide it. I think as a community, most Sikhs don't want to deal with it, even yet. I think it'll take some time when people will one day take an honest assessment of it. So all the hurt as a community, I think, is still buried in the Sikh psyche. I feel that. And I think on the Indian side also, there's a lot of people in India there who feel that what happened in New Delhi and how no one was ever really punished for it. You know, you can't hold your head up as a nation, as a democratic nation, when you have that hanging around your neck. It's good for your own psyche to clear your conscience. And India as a nation has not cleared its conscience. So I think that's going to live on.